How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another Prehistoric Kingdom video. So, as I mentioned in the last Prehistoric Kingdom video, I've just been having a lot of fun with the first-person mode. So I was like, hey, why don't we make some content with the first-person mode? So I decided to kind of like set up all of the creatures so that we can walk through, talk about them a little bit, and kind of like get a good idea of how big these animals were in life. I think that this is like a fantastic opportunity to do something like that. So let's begin. I have them all set up in a sort of, there's like, I don't know if you've ever been to one, but there's like across the United States, at least, every once in a while you can come across like a little bit of a dinosaur park. You just walk through and there's just dinosaur statues, and that's kind of what this looks like. Except you get accurate dinosaurs here. But starting off, we have Acrocanthosaurus here. Acrocanthosaurus is a carcharodontisaurid. You can tell by the shape of its skull and everything. Very thin skull, of course, right there. And of course, it was big. It also did have tall, narrow spines going down the midline of its back, which kind of gave it a little bit of a hump in life. Very cool. After that is Carcharodontosaurus, one of the larger Carcharodontosaurids. It's also the namesake for the family, if you couldn't tell. Carcharodontosaurus translates to shark-toothed lizard, and that's because their teeth are very similar to shark teeth. But very cool dinosaur, of course. You know, it coexisted with Spinosaurus, and I'm sure it's one of the most iconic Carcharodontosaurids out there. Coelophysis is one of the first known dinosaurs. I'm not going to be able to provide information for all of them, by the way, but I'm going to try for as many as I could. This is going to be a little bit of a longer video, and it just gives me an excuse to talk about these dinosaurs in this awesome game. Anyway, Coelophysis is one of the first known dinosaurs. It appeared in the late Triassic, back when dinosaurs were not nearly as diverse as they became in the Jurassic period. It was a small predatory dinosaur that it could have been feathered too. You know, that's operating under the idea that Coelophysis and other early dinosaurs had some type of feathering that was later, carried over into later families of dinosaurs. So that's always a cool thought, but there's a lot of Coelophysis specimens out there too. Might as well mention that. Deinonychirus is the largest ornithomimosaur. It being an ornithomimosaur means that it belongs to the clade, the same clade as Ornithomimus, Gallimimus, Archaeornithomimus, Struthiomimus, all those fellas. And it was a big son of a gun. Like, look at this. A lot of people like to describe it as like the duck, the platypus of the dinosaurs. And I agree. It's like you have a face that's a lot more like a hadrosaur. It has a hump over here, huge arms with 3 massive claws on each hand. And yeah, it's a very crazy dinosaur. This is one of my favorite dinosaurs right here. This is Dilophosaurus. Dilophosaurus is a lot longer than, or larger. Well, yeah, longer too, but a lot larger than it was portrayed in the movies. Jurassic Park, of course, you had like a relatively small one that could have been a juvenile, but later films have not confirmed that per se. We only ever see the small ones. Dilophosaurus in life was a lot, like closer to 8 feet tall, which means that it would be taller than me in real life, who's 6'2", which is pretty terrifying, you know. And it's a very cool dinosaur. It's got 2 crests on its head. It's just an amazing dinosaur. I love it. I also love that they gave it like small filamentous feathers. Next up is, of course, the best dinosaur to ever exist, Spinosaurus, my favorite dinosaur. It's a dinosaur that is the center of a lot of controversy, mostly about its behaviors and its hunting lifestyle. A lot of folks think that it acted more like a crocodilian, swimming through the waters, whereas others, myself included, think that it was more like a heron and just waded in shallow waters. Either way, we probably don't have the full picture, but that's one of the reasons why Spinosaurus is really cool. It's also very strange. It's got like a basilisk-like tail back here because it had tall neural spines over here and chevrons, like these long chevrons that went down the bottom of the tail and just kind of made it look like a paddle, but it seems like it might be more like a structure that'd be used for display. After that, we have Tarbosaurus. Now, I actually didn't know this, but this little, I think it's called a dewlap down here, there is a chance that Tarbosaurus had that. I think that there were like a couple Tarbosaurus specimens that were discovered a long time ago, I don't have an exact date, that could have had a dewlap preserved on the throat. But either those fossils were destroyed or were lost, and so we don't really have confirmation of it. But it is a possibility that they had something like this. Tarbosaurus is, of course, very closely related to Tyrannosaurus. You can tell that it's very similar to it. It's got that huge head, and its overall build is very similar to Tyrannosaurus, but it is distinct. It is a different genus per our knowledge. Torvosaurus right here. Metriacanthosaurid, you gotta love Metriacanthosaurids. They always have like a really interesting shaped skull that's a lot more square compared to other theropods. And, they ruled the Jurassic of Portugal and of North America. You got two species right here. Both of them look awesome. I really like the little spines that go down the back on this one right here. Very cool, very cool, very cool dinosaur. And of course, here's the Tyrant Lizard King. Everybody knows about Tyrannosaurus Rex, easily like the most studied dinosaur that we have in the fossil record. A lot of people dedicate a lot of their time to Tyrannosaurus Rex. It's got forward-facing eyes. It had an incredibly adept sense of smell and the most powerful bite force of any land animal to ever exist, which is just insane. It was a bone-crushing bite, which Tyrannosaurs typically did have a bone-crushing bite from what we could tell from fossil evidence. There's a lot of, like in areas where tyrannosaurs were common, like the tyrannosaurids, there would be a lot of bones that are found with tooth marks in them. This implies that tyrannosaurs mostly prioritized a powerful bite more so than tearing into flesh or something like that, which is kind of terrifying, but really cool. Very iconic dinosaur, very iconic family of dinosaurs, I should say. Velociraptor, another one that's very different from how it is in the movies. Of course, it's a little fella, as you can see right here. Also, keep in mind, like, my size compared to the way that these guys look is overall probably decently accurate, so you're probably getting a good idea of the way this fella looked in life. Velociraptor in life was about the size of a turkey, but it did still have some traits like that very terrible sickle claw on its toe, mouthful of very sharp teeth, large orbits, probably had pretty large eyes that might have helped it in low light conditions, kind of fitting that it's in the shade right here. And of course, a bit of a tail fan right here, which I think looks really cool on this animal specifically. It's a very cool design right here. Also, again, very small. And then we get into the really big territory. This is where life was just like, yeah, you know what? We're going to go as big as we possibly can. And we have Apatosaurus right here, a Morrison Formation sauropod dinosaur. It is a diplodocid, which means that it is in the same family as other famous dinosaurs like Diplodocus. They had a huge and thick neck because they had these massive vertebrae. And notably, something that's really cool is that their skeleton was almost hollow. They had a series of openings that traveled down their neck and their back right here that made their skeletons relatively light. It's one of the reasons why they can support such a huge weight. What's also noticeable is that diplodocids, like Apatosaurus here, did have a huge thin tail that could have been used for a weapon. Like in Prehistoric Prehistoric Kingdom, it seems they gave it little spikes or little keratinous tools on the end of it that could help it with that, which is a very interesting take. But the one takeaway is that they could have used it as a weapon, but they couldn't really crack it like a whip. That would simply just break their tail, which is not ideal. Next up is Argentinosaurus. As far as we know, it is the largest dinosaur and by extension the largest land animal to ever walk the earth. From our current information, there is a possibility that there were larger sauropods out there. We just need some more confirmation. But it was a titanosaurian sauropod, and it was huge. Look at the size of this thing. It's like if I'm a human, I don't even come close to the whole size of its leg. It's crazy. And Titanosaurs had really strange feet. The back feet looked like this, and the front feet were basically like pillars. They didn't really have any obvious toes up front, which is very weird, but very cool. Brachiosaurus. Everybody knows Brachiosaurus, especially from Jurassic Park. Little fun fact about Brachiosaurus: most depictions that you see are actually Giraffatitan. And the reason why that is because the North American Brachiosaurus that was discovered was notoriously incomplete, most notably lacking the skull. So, they didn't really have any idea of what it looked like. It wasn't until later in Africa when there was another possible species of Brachiosaurus that was found that was then dubbed as another species of Brachiosaurus. So, earlier reconstructions of Brachiosaurus were actually based off of this African species. It wasn't until much later when closer analysis was done on these two different supposed species, and it was found that the African species is not a Brachiosaurus at all, but rather is its own genus known as Giraffatitan. So that means the one that you see in Jurassic Park is actually Giraffatitan, at least in terms of its appearance. In name, of course, it's Brachiosaurus, but its appearance is a lot closer to Giraffatitan. That's just a little fun fact, and I wonder if this like sort of giraffe patterning back here is a reference to that, because giraffe, a titan, you know. But Brachiosaurids have a very interesting body plan. Of course, their hind limbs are shorter than their front limbs, so it gives them sort of like a giraffe stance, which is really cool. And yeah, they're very cool dinosaurs. Brontosaurus was once thought to be invalid for a very long time. It wasn't until 2015, when closer analysis was done on a lot of different diplodocid specimens, that the conclusion was reached that Brontosaurus truly did exist. You know, it is not another species of Apatosaurus, which is what we believed for the longest time. It was its own distinct species, and you can see it right here. Also, still very big. What's also interesting about this design right here is that it has these sort of little keratinous spikes down here, and that's because their vertebrae have these weird spikes that kind of jut down, or these little ribs, I suppose, that jut down quite significantly. We don't have confirmation that they had something like that, but it is a possibility, I suppose. So yeah, very cool. Camarasaurus is another Morrison formation dinosaur. Yeah, we've had, let's see, Apatosaurus was Morrison, Brachiosaurus was, Brontosaurus was, and of course Camarasaurus was as well, and Torvosaurus. You know, I won't forget the North American species. Not too much to say about it, other than the fact that it is a very cool looking sauropod. It's probably one of my favorite sauropods in terms of its appearance, because I like the way that its head looks and the way it kind of leads into this huge neck right here. It's a very cool dinosaur, and this one specifically, I think this is Camarasaurus supremus, I think the name is. If I was wrong, then I'll probably correct myself. But it's a very cool dinosaur. You know, its stomping grounds were around where I live, so it's one of those dinosaurs. I'm like, yeah, you know what? I like you. Plateosaurus is probably my favorite sauropodomorph. It is essentially like sauropodomorphs. The early sauropodomorphs, like Plateosaurus, sometimes they're called prosauropods, are essentially the precursor to these larger sauropods right here. You can see how different they were. In the earlier history, like evolutionary history of dinosaurs specifically, like in particular, they were typically bipedal. So most dinosaurs you would find back then had a bipedal stance. We saw it with the Coelophysis over there, and Plateosaurus was no exception. It had relatively small arms with hands that had huge claws on them as well, a decently long neck, and of course, a proportionally small head. Of course, the larger species over here has the exact same thing going on with it. Ankylosaurus here. I feel like these colors are a reference to Walking with Dinosaurs, which I love, so I always put these colors on it. Ankylosaurus is often regarded as a walking tank, and that's because it's covered by these osteoderms right here. If you don't know, I explain it every once in a while. Osteoderms are simply just bones that grow in the skin, which means that they are detached from the rest of the skeleton. And on Ankylosaurus, it had a lot of them that acted as pretty decent armor, but also could have, acted as like a display structure as well. Like that's most notable with its club back here. Its club, perfect defense weapon, but it was likely something that was evolved for display or to fight other ankylosaurs, for what is it, intraspecific combat? Is it intraspecific if it's members of the same species? I think it is. Because we do have some fossils of, I think, Zool, which is another ankylosaurid, where it's like the shoulder osteoderms have been dented in because it was caused by another ankylosaurus. It was likely something that was done for sort of, I want to say, breeding purposes or just for dominant purposes or something like that. It's very interesting stuff, and Ankylosaurus is a very cool one. It's pretty big too. You stand right next to it, and it's a big fella. Over here is Solidosaurus. It is a dinosaur that we have a pretty good idea of what it looked like in life because we have very complete specimens of it. It too is covered with osteoderms, as you can see right here. And basically what you see right here is a pretty good, I can crouch. Oh, that helps. A pretty good depiction of the animal. It's a cool little fella too. I love the way that he looks. Such a cool little dinosaur. This is Tyrannosaurus. It is, of course, a hadrosaur, and it's very related to Parasaurolophus, I don't know too much about it. In fact, I haven't ever been able to identify the differences between Tyrannosaurus and Parasaurolophus because I simply haven't looked into it. However, I will say this, that the Prehistoric Kingdom developers have updated the Tyrannosaurus model. So now it has like a smaller crest than it did before, and it's a lot more like, I guess, broad or wide compared to the thin one that it had before. So that's pretty cool. That'll help distinguish it from Parasaurolophus, which we have, I think, 2 species in this game. It also has this sort of hoof-like structure. I'll cover that a little bit more when we get to the that one, the Edmontosaurus. But it's cool. I love the color of its crest. I think it's very vibrant, and I love it. Dryosaurus right here, another Morrison Formation dinosaur. Surprisingly larger than most folks think. Like, you know, standing right next to me, I don't think this is quite the accurate size because they are a little bit larger than this. But they are a pretty big dinosaur. A lot of people don't think so because they, you know, they're always portrayed alongside other big dinosaurs, like really big dinosaurs like the sauropods or the large theropods of the Morrison Formation like Allosaurus or something like that. But they were decently big. You know, they were pretty big dinosaurs. And if you saw it in real life, you'd be like, that's a big dinosaur. I guess it's more medium-sized dinosaur, but still. This is Edmontosaurus annectens. This is likely the largest species in the Hell Creek Formation, which means it would be larger than T-Rex and Triceratops. Edmontosaurus, hadrosaurs in general, a lot of different hadrosaurs were big. And you can certainly tell right here, it might be a little bit too small. Like, I'm starting to think that my character is a little bit tall. Which would kind of make sense for this Dryosaurus, but I have no confirmation on that. But they were big dinosaurs. A full-grown one, T-Rex being an actual animal, would probably hesitate to hunt one if it was fully grown and a healthy adult. It doesn't matter if T-Rex had the most powerful bite force. An animal is going to try to take the easiest route to get a meal, which means it would probably go after a young Edmontosaurus or a sick one before it would go after a healthy adult. This one's really cool, though. I love the coloration that it has right here. Oh, yeah, and the hoof-like structures. So this was a relatively recent discovery, kind of relatively recent, where it was found that Edmontosaurus had these sort of hoof-like structures on its forelimbs, which is weird and really cool. There is a good chance that other hadrosaurs have them, which is why you can see, like, the Tyrannosaurus had it. But it's one of those structures that makes Edmontosaurus and hadrosaurs in general, like, really cool dinosaurs in my eyes. This is Regalis. This is technically the smaller species of Edmontosaurus. Currently, like one of the best ways to identify if it's Edmontosaurus Regalis is if it has this fleshy comb up here. That was a structure that was found in a very well-preserved Edmontosaurus specimen. It was made out of soft tissue, which is probably why it doesn't preserve too well. We know that Edmontosaurus Regalis had it. We don't know if it was a sexual dimorphism trait, like if only the males or only the females had them, but we at least know that some of them did. There is a possibility that, say, Edmontosaurus annectens had it, but that has currently not been found. But we just know that at least some Edmontosaurus regalis had it, which is cool. Iguanodon. This is the second ever dinosaur to be given a name. 200 years ago this year. And I think this month, too. Like Iguanodon, very old dinosaur. It's gone through a lot of very drastic paleo reconstructions since its official description back in 1825. There was once a point in time where it looked like a giant iguana with a horn on its nose. You know, we've eventually found out that that was not a horn, and instead that was one of its thumb spikes that you could see right here. It had one for each thumb, of course. It's an iconic dinosaur. It's one of the most important dinosaurs in terms of paleontology, and it's one that you can really look at to say, hey, look how much we learned about this specific animal, because you can see like a nice kind of gradual transition to this point right here. Very cool dinosaur. This right here is Lambeosaurus, another really cool crest. A lot of hadrosaurs have very cool head ornamentation. If I'm correct about this, I know this is correct about Parasaurolophus. That's probably a hollow structure that connects to the nasal cavity, which means it could be something that can help them amplify their noises, which is always really cool. Lielanosaura was a little Australian dinosaur, notable for having a very long tail that's portrayed right here, which is just cute. It's just cute, and this one is covered in feathers, and I love it. Um, Such a cool little dinosaur. This right here is my favorite Australian dinosaur. It's an ornithopod known as Muttaburrasaurus. Muttaburrasaurus has a very strange looking skull. I compare it to Yoshi sometimes. The skull has a huge opening right here that was most likely, well, it almost certainly was covered in soft tissue. It's possible that that was used to amplify noises. In fact, in Walking with Dinosaurs, you can see it use it for that very purpose. Uh, but all around, it's a strange structure that I think is really cool. Also notable is that Muttaburrasaurus was a bipedal dinosaur, but it would be able to switch to a quadrupedal stance every once in a while if it was getting something to eat or drink. The same can be said for Ouranosaurus right here. What's cool about Ouranosaurus that I didn't know about until like a year or so ago is that they actually have a little bit of a thumb spike too, similar to Iguanodon. These guys are a little bit more related to Iguanodon than they are to, say, hadrosaurs. They do also have a sail, which is something that that is very similar to Spinosaurus, and their skull is, of course, a lot more elongated than some other iguanodontian dinosaurs. These are the two species of Parasaurolophus. I can't quite remember this species name, but this is Parasaurolophus walkeri, one of the larger species. It's got like a really huge crest right here. And as I alluded to before, that crest is hollow and it connects to the nasal cavity, which is something that might allow it to send air through its crest and then produce loud noises. This is something that actually was replicated. A team of researchers did put together a sort of makeshift Parasaurolophus skull, and then they sent air through it, and that produced a noise. It's a very cool and interesting noise, and it's probably the closest that we'll get to actually hearing a dinosaur sound. It's probably not one for one. You know, there was likely a lot of soft tissue and whatnot that was actually in the animal's crest, but it's still a very good start in terms of understanding some dinosaur vocalization. This is, I can't remember the name specifically. It starts with a U, and I'm not too sure if this one's actually a dubious genus. I think it might just be another species of Edmontosaurus, but I don't have too much to say about it. Nasutoceratops. I love Nasutoceratops mainly because of just its interesting brow horns. They start by growing off to the side right here, and then they start to curve forward, looking a lot like bull horns, which is cool. Also, it has a huge nose. Fun fact, the name Nasutoceratops translates to thick-nosed horn face. It's a very, very descriptive name. Some dinosaur names are very descriptive. Here is one of my favorite dinosaurs, certainly my favorite herbivorous dinosaur. This is Pachyrhinosaurus. Pachyrhinosaurus is pretty easy to identify. It's not the only ceratopsian that had a structure like this, but it's certainly the most famous, and that is this structure right here that is very different from a horn that you'll often see on most other ceratopsians. This structure is known as a boss, which was just this mass of bone that grew on its nose. It could have been used for interspecific combat, or it could have been used to ward off a predator, or maybe just as a display structure. Same as the frill. It seems that with ceratopsians, their frills mostly acted as a display structure rather than something that would help them defend themselves, because their frills were relatively weak, all things considered. Here's another Pachyrhinosaurus right here. Like, we have 3 identified species. I might get these two mixed up because the one I know most about is Lacustae, because Lacustae is my favorite species. Lacustae is often identified by having these little horns that grow at the base of its frill. That's the easiest way to identify Lacustae. I can't remember which one is which, but I think this is Pyritorum, and this one might be Canadaensis. I could be incorrect. If I am, switch those. But they're all really cool, and I really like the colors on this one. Really highlights the fact that this was likely used as a display structure. This one has some speculative feathering on it. Likely because it's one of the species that lived in a cooler environment. We don't really have any evidence for something like that in a ceratopsian like this. So it is mostly just a for fun thing, just to have it sort of thing. But it is pretty unlikely, all things considered. Still pretty cool and interesting to see, though. This is Protoceratops, one of these smaller ceratopsians. Of course, it lived in Mongolia during the late Cretaceous period. It was about the same size as a sheep overall, so quite a difference from the larger ceratopsians. Another little speculative feature, but it appears they put like some little spikes or little quill-like structures down the midline, which is really, really interesting. What's also kind of notable to me anyway is that Protoceratops is another dinosaur that has like a weird shaped tail. I don't know why my cursor is suddenly here, but I guess that's joining us for now. These ones are Psittacosaurus. These represent 3 species. They're really cool little dinosaurs, but the most notable one is this currently unnamed species of Psittacosaurus. It's funny, but it's like one of the best known dinosaurs in terms of its overall appearance, but we don't really have a species name for it. It's currently unidentified. A very well-preserved specimen reveals melanosomes, which are pigments that allow for the animal's colors, which means we can determine the animal's colors, and this is the coloration it had. It reveals the counter shading that was happening for the animal. The counter shading suggests that it lived in a forested environment. And we also saw that it did have these sort of bristles on the end of its tail, these little quill-like structures. Also, the cloaca is preserved in the specimen. So the specimen of this Psittacosaurus revealed a lot about the actual animal. The other ones, they do have different skull shapes and different body proportions, I suppose, overall. But we don't know as much about them as we know about this unidentified species, which I think is pretty interesting. Styracosaurus, I think, is a really cool one. One of the biggest reasons is because there was a specimen known as Hannah that was noted to be asymmetrical. This side was different from that side, which might imply that there was probably a little bit more individual variation. I think that was mostly caused from an injury on Hannah specifically. But it does show that there is the possibility for some pretty decent individual variation in ceratopsians like Styracosaurus. These little quills are interesting, though. Again, that is a speculative feature. This right here is Triceratops horridus. This is the earlier species of Triceratops, often identified, best identified by having a small nasal horn, whereas Prorsus here, which is the later species, has a longer horn, and of course the shapes of the brow horns are a little bit different. I think that, if I remember correctly, I think Horridus, its brow horns curve back a little bit more, whereas with Prorsus, they curve forward a little bit more. Now, Prorsus is the one that most people would know about because it's the one that went extinct at the very end of the Cretaceous alongside Tyrannosaurus rex. So this is the one that went through the asteroid impact, which is very interesting to me because I think that most people, at least anyone who brings up species names of dinosaurs, would bring up Triceratops horridus. So it's interesting that this is probably the one that most people are thinking about. This is the woolly mammoth. Oddly enough, we know more about like the genetics and just the biology of mammoths than we do about most animals that exist today. A lot of mammoths have been very well preserved with like some remnants of DNA intact. We know what coloration they had. What's interesting about mammoths is that they had like a wide array of different colors that ranged from blondes to blackish colors to reddish colors to more brownish colors. They had these relatively small ears. They had these huge tusks, and an analysis of the tusks found that they're pretty similar to modern day elephants in the way that they go through things like musk and whatnot. So they're very iconic extinct animals and ones that we just have a very good understanding of, which is pretty cool. These are the cave lions. This is Panthera spelaea, which is the European species, and then this right here is Panthera atrox, which is the North American species. This one is, of course, quite a bit bulky. I love the detail of the muscles right there. That's really cool. And then we get into more big cat territory. We have Smilodon over here. There's a few different species of Smilodon identified. There is Smilodon gracilis, there's Smilodon fatalis, and then there's Smilodon populator. This one right here is fatalis. It is a smaller species that lived in North America. This is populator, which is famously the largest species that we know of Smilodon that lived in South America. And it's terrifying. It's huge compared to me right now. It's quite scary. This is Ursus spelaea, which is best commonly known as the cave bear. Really big bear that significantly had a huge hump right here, as you can see right there. But it looks very similar to many modern day bears, but this fella was huge. Wouldn't want to come across it. This is Coelodonta, more commonly known as the woolly rhino. It's basically, like, anatomically speaking, it's pretty similar to modern day rhinos, but they typically had longer nose horns, which modern day rhinos can have nose horns that are pretty long too. And they were, of course, woolly because they were a lot more adapted for a cooler environment. They're really interesting as well. Elasmotherium is another type of rhinoceros. This one in particular had like a huge hump and just it like had legs that adapted for either longer running, like being able to run for a longer period of time, or for running quicker. I can't remember which. What's also notable is that it does have a structure in the middle of its head. There has been a lot of debate on whether or not it was a longhorn like portrayed right here, or if it was a boss, similar to the boss that you saw on Pachyrhinosaurus over there. Most of the evidence seems to lean towards the boss, which I don't know why I didn't put down the boss version here, but actually, let me get that real quick. And now here's the version with the boss. Of course, it's significantly more reduced compared to this huge longhorn right here. Also, the fur is a little bit different, which is pretty cool. It's a little bit more blonde. That's kind of interesting. This is Jushia, very closely related to rhinos, but of course, it's smaller than some of its later cousins right there. It's still a very cool little animal, though. I quite like it. This is Megaloceros. It's often called the Irish elk, which in terms of like North American terms, they are not that closely related to elk. Rather, they're a lot more closely related to fallow deer. But what's most notable is that they have huge antlers spanning around 11 feet in length. So they're massive, and they also did have a hump back here. Paraceratherium, we got a couple species right here. Paraceratherium is one of the largest land mammals to ever exist. Huge, huge animal. In terms of weight, it of course trumps the African elephant. However, there are other types of elephants like Paleoloxodon that could have been bigger, but there is probably still some research and more debates that need to be had before that happens, or before that's confirmed. And of course, it's not the largest like mammal to ever exist, because the blue whale is the largest animal to ever exist, not just mammal. But yeah, they were giant like relatives to rhinos. They did have a proboscis right on the front. I know that there's gonna be some people who didn't like how I said that, and they're just massive. They're just massive animals, thick-skinned and just really awesome. I love Paraceratherium. And then this is Cynotherium. Likely, this is what Elasmotherium evolved from. I think that's what most are agreeing with. And, you know, it's got some similar structures about it, like its head shape, of course. It is a rhino, and it's got that hump back here. Very similar to Elasmotherium. Okay, I almost completely forgot about these fellas, but of course there are little dinosaurs right here, like the Archaeopteryx. I can't get too close, apparently. The Archaeopteryx and the Microraptor. What is pretty cool about these fellas is that you're actually getting a pretty decently accurate look of them. That's pretty cool. It's got some cool coloration. Archaeopteryx and Microraptor, those are two dinosaurs that we have some idea of what colors they were in life. Similar to the Psittacosaurus, melanosomes are present on them. Archaeopteryx, it seems that it had like the end of its wing was more of like a matte black coloration. And I don't really know if I'm seeing any of that here. Well, maybe I'm seeing some of it. And of course, there is the possibility for differences in individuals. Like some individuals had different colors and things like that. It's a very nice design, though. The coverage of feathers looks impeccable, and look at them just like preening their feathers. It's very cool. Oh, that one's on the ground. Look at you. But Microraptor, we have an idea of what its whole body looked like, and that is this coloration, which is sort of like an iridescent blackish, bluish, greenish coloration, similar to modern day crows. And that is represented here. It's a very, very nice design. They also might have been capable of powered flight, which is another thing we see here. Archaeopteryx might have been capable of doing something like that too. But either way, these are just very, very nice designs in this game, of course. You know, very important dinosaurs in terms of our understanding of dinosaurs. So yeah, those are the creatures of Prehistoric Kingdom. This was actually a lot of fun to do. It was kind of fun to just sit back and chill and just talk about all of these awesome animals. So I could probably let them all walk around now while I'm running around. They all lie down. Oh, they're getting back up. Okay. Yeah, no, this was a lot of fun to dive into. Like it was really relaxing to just kind of sit back and just talk about these amazing animals. If you guys enjoy this type of video, I'm sure I can do it for some other games, at least other games where I'd have the opportunity to do so. Prehistoric Kingdom, I'm pretty lucky because I'm able to really control these animals and just place them down wherever. Um, I liked it though. I liked it. It's just nice. So I hope you guys did enjoy this video. I want to say thank you to my Patreon supporters as well as my channel members. I don't think I've ever explained the whole channel membership thing yet. I've mostly talked about my Patreon, but the channel membership, if you join that, I think for like around, I think at most $3, you will gain early access to any future YouTube video, which is I think is a really cool perk. So if that's something that you're interested in, consider following that link down below. But yeah, I am seriously just loving this update. Using first person mode is kind of a game changer for me. You know, I love viewing these animals from this perspective. Like being, doing this is fine, but then it kind of gets exhausting for me to have to go down like this and try to angle things perfectly. It gets a little bit exhausting. I prefer going down like this and then just walking up to it and really getting a feel for the animals. It's cool. It's really cool. But that's pretty much all I have for this one right now. Thank you guys so much for watching and have an awesome day.